All right, so we are in 4.2 and now we're talking about some congruent triangles, but we have to start off as always with some vocab review. Again, you've written these down, but we have to go over them just to make sure you remember what they are. So congruent, remember the word congruent means the same. So in other words, these are polygons or shapes. Polygons are shapes that are the same. So it's two figures that can be mapped on top of one another to look exactly the same. Corresponding parts are the parts that match between two polygons. Or are the same. And here, something important to note is the phrase CPCTC. And all that means is corresponding parts of congruent triangles. Remember, that means congruent. And that means triangles are congruent. So that just means that if I have two triangles that are congruent, then the parts that are congruent to each other. So if I had triangles A, B, C, D, E, and F, and I told you that they're congruent, because of how I wrote this, AB is congruent to DE. BC would be congruent to EF. So pay attention to how it's written. And then AC is congruent to DF. And then your angles would be congruent as the letters. So A is congruent to D. And we'll go over this again in a second. B is congruent to E. And C is congruent to F. And finally, our last vocabulary word is principle of superposition, and it just means the same thing as basically as congruent polygons. It's not a super important word, but it comes up. So here we are asked to identify the corresponding parts. So remember, the number of lines or the number of arcs means that the parts are congruent. So we're going to start with the sides. So since this has one line, I'm looking for something in the other polygon with one line. And that's where we have this. So we have PQ is congruent to GF. It's also important to note the arcs. So P is congruent to G, so they should be in line with each other. So my angles, we said P is congruent to G, and then my F was congruent to Q. So then Q to R, and I'll change colors here. Q to R, so I have two lines here, so F to E. So I already said that Q and F are congruent, so R and E should be congruent, and notice they are. They both have 3 arcs. I personally won't be super picky about how you write these and if they're really, like if you switch this around and say Q R is congruent to E, F, because it still is technically congruent. However, they're going to be picky on the state test, so that's why I'm going over it like I am. Next one, go from my 3 arcs to my 4 arcs, so R to S. So 3 to 4 is E to D. And notice they both have 3 lines saying that they're congruent to each other. They both have those 3 dashes. So we said R to E, R and E are congruent, so S and D are congruent. And did that color, so we use red. Last one, S to P and D to G. Oops, D, not P. So S has 4 arcs, D has 4 arcs, we said that. And we said that P and G are congruent already. So we have 4 sides that are congruent, 4 angles. And that's all it is. We're just basically stating what parts are congruent to what. So here, we are going to find the value of x and y given that these triangles are congruent. So we know they're congruent to each other. If I was to pick up this triangle here, see if I can do this, copy. If I was to pick it up, I should kind of be able to place it right on top and it would match up. So I know that this is congruent to that 99. They're in the same orientation, so I have 8y minus 5 equals 99. So I can solve for y, and I'm going to solve for y first because notice this one has both x and y. So if I solve for y, then I can figure out what x is, which is going to be equal to that 38.4. Okay, so 8y minus 5, let's add that 5 to both sides to get 8y is equal to 104. Divide both sides by 8 to solve for y, and you're going to get the y is 13. So plug that in here. Which gives us 26 plus x equals 38.4. Subtract that 26 from both sides. So x is equal to 12.4. And that's all it is. So there is a theorem that is theorem 4.3. It's called the third angle theorem, and it says that if 2 angles are congruent in a triangle, then the third angle are congruent. So essentially this is saying if this is 20 and this is 30, and in this triangle this is 20 and this is 30, that means that I've used 50 plus something is equal to 180, and it's the same thing here. 50 plus something is 180. So the third angle has to be the same because these are the same equation. That's all that's saying. Let's see. We will go ahead and skip the proof, and that is all. So the biggest thing is specifically knowing that these corresponding parts and how to write them. This will come in handy. You'll see this a little bit. There may be a question or two on a knowledge check, but this is the part that you really need to know how to do. Otherwise, that's it. There is a worksheet to complete. I think it's just a matching game, basically. You're just matching the corresponding parts, basically exactly like we did here. That's all.